Something gripping is happening in Togo. Just days ago, the streets of this West African nation erupted in anger. Ordinary citizens, tired and fed up, took to the roads to protest against their president, a leader who, they say, seized power not through soldiers or guns, but through the very laws meant to protect them. A constitutional coup. But unlike the military coups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, which surprisingly won cheers from the public, this silent power grab in Togo has been flatly rejected by its people, and that's why the protests began. But the government wasn't going to let them march freely. Police were sent out in force, clashes erupted, people were arrested, and a question hangs heavy in the air. Why have the people of Togo turned against this coup, and will their protests actually change anything? The answer might lie with a new movement shaking the nation's core. Recently, a coalition of civic groups and opposition leaders banded together. They call themselves Hands Off My Constitution. Their mission is simple but dangerous: to fight back against the constitutional coup and demand real change. It was this group that organized the recent protests and called for more. On Thursday, the 26th of June, 2025, the first major protest erupted. That morning, small groups gathered in pockets across Lomé, the capital. They blocked roads. They burned tires and built wooden barricades. A city that should have been busy fell eerily silent as many businesses stayed shut. I decided to shut everything down today in support of the protests that have started to liberate our country. Because enough is enough. We want change, said Helene, a shopkeeper in the capital. Her words echoed the feelings of thousands. But the government was ready to respond, with force. Police stormed the streets, determined to crush the momentum. They labeled the demonstrators anti-government protesters and fired tear gas into the crowds. Several people were arrested in the B neighborhood, an area known as a stronghold for the opposition. And this isn't the first time this year that Togo's leaders have answered protest with violence. Earlier this month, on June 5th and 6th, security forces cracked down on protests in Lomé. More than 50 people were taken into custody. Of those arrested, 56 were eventually released on June 9th, but others remain missing. No one knows where they are or what's happened to them. But beyond arrests and disappearances, an even darker truth has come to light. While detained, many protesters say they were tortured or cruelly mistreated. One man described the nightmare. We were lying on the ground with 6 or 7 officers around us. They poured water over us and hit us on the buttocks with cords. They hit the soles of our feet and asked us, "Are you going to go out and demonstrate again?" They threatened us. At one point, they ordered us to go dancing in the rain. They ordered a protester who had been arrested with a megaphone to sing into the switched-off machine. Another protester shared his pain. "I still have pain in my buttocks, my hip, and I have difficulty lifting my right arm." Others spoke of signing documents at the gendarmerie without understanding what they were. Some said they were threatened over the phone after posting about the violence on social media. This is the terrifying price many Togolese are paying for daring to stand up and say, "Enough." And as the dust settles on the cracked streets of Lomé, one question remains. Will the courage of these protesters be enough to break the chains of a constitutional coup? Or is Togo destined to remain trapped in silence and fear? All of this abuse, all of this torture, it was simply because people dared to exercise their constitutional right. Yet, the government refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Instead, in a statement broadcast on state television, the public prosecutor dismissed the protests as nothing more than individuals who noisily occupied the public thoroughfares, orchestrating raucous noises and erecting barricades. But here's the truth. The protesters were not violent. They were simply demanding their rights. And what the government did is a clear violation of both the rights of Togolese citizens and international law. So it's no surprise that anger is boiling over in Togo, because behind these protests lies a story of power and betrayal. Just last month, the president of Togo was appointed as the president of the Council of Ministers. It's a brand new position, created after a constitutional change last year. On paper, it might sound like just another title, but in reality, it's a seat of ultimate power. This role is now the highest office in Togo's executive branch. And here's the catch. It comes with no official term limits. In simple terms, Whoever becomes president of the Council of Ministers can rule for life, but that's not what the people want. For decades, Togo followed the path laid out by its former colonial ruler, France. The country practiced a presidential system, a president elected directly by the people. He would rule until his term expired. Often, presidents could run for a second or even a third term, but eventually, time ran out and they had to step aside. Yet across Africa, a troubling pattern emerged. Some leaders refused to let go of power. Instead, they rewrote their nation's constitutions, tweaking the laws just enough to keep themselves in office indefinitely. And last year, Togo's president joined that list. He changed the constitution, transforming Togo from a presidential system into a parliamentary one. Under this new system, ordinary people would no longer vote directly for their president. Instead, the power to choose the nation's leader would rest with parliament. At first glance, it might not seem so bad. After all, countries like Canada and the United Kingdom also use parliamentary systems, and they function as stable democracies. But in Togo, things are different, because here, the people don't trust the parliament, and they have good reason not to. And that's why the streets of Lomé are burning. That's why protesters keep coming back, despite the beatings, the arrests, and the fear. Because in Togo, this fight isn't just about politics, it's about the right to choose. It's about freedom itself. You see, under a true parliamentary system, the rules are meant to protect democracy. The Constitution says that the president, chosen directly by parliament, can serve only a single 6-year term. Once those 6 years are up, that person can never run again. At first glance, it sounds fair. A single term, no endless re-elections, checks and balances built into the system. But there's a catch. Because under this new structure, the presidency becomes a ceremonial role, stripped of real power. Instead, the true authority belongs to the Prime Minister, the person who holds the title of President of the Council of Ministers. And it's that powerful seat that Faure Gnassingbé, the current president of Togo, has just secured for himself. He's moving into the role of Prime Minister this coming August, right after the elections in July 2025. And that's why the people are calling it a coup. Because there's more to the story. Originally, it was agreed that whoever became Prime Minister would serve a 6-year term. The idea was that the Prime Minister would be the leader of the party or the leader of the majority coalition of parties following the legislative elections. But Faure Gnassingbé changed the rules. He removed the term limit. Now, the Prime Minister's position no longer has an expiration date. Simply put, he can stay in power for life. And for the people of Togo, this feels like betrayal. Because instead of giving power to the parliament or the people, one man has rewritten the system to keep himself at the top forever. That's why the streets are full of anger. That's why people are risking tear gas, arrests, and torture. Because for them, this isn't just politics. It's a fight for the right to choose who leads them. It's a fight to decide their own future. How exactly is any of this constitutional or democratic? The truth is, it's not. But the president of Togo doesn't seem to care. The most shocking part is that Faure Gnassingbé has already been ruling Togo since 2005. That's 20 years in power, 2 full decades. From the moment he took office, President Faure kept tweaking and bending the constitution, always finding ways to extend his time under the presidential system. But even for him, time eventually ran out. He reached the point where he could no longer stay on as president. So he came up with a new plan. He decided to change the entire system, moving Togo from a presidential system to a parliamentary one. Why do some African leaders cling to power for so long? It's the same story repeated across generations. Faure's own father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, ruled Togo before him, and not for a short time. Eyadema stayed in power for an astonishing 38 years. Put it together, father and son, and the Gnassingbé family has ruled Togo for nearly 58 years, nearly 6 decades under one family's grip. With that history, it's hard to call Togo a democracy. Instead, many believe it has become a kind of democratic monarchy, where leadership is passed from father to son under the cover of elections that feel more like theater than real choice. And that's why the people are furious. This is not the freedom they were promised. It's not what they bargained for when they dreamed of independence. So they've taken to the streets, risking everything, simply to exercise their constitutional rights. But once again, the government has answered their cries for freedom with tear gas, batons, and silence.
Once a rare sight in Togo's capital Lomé, protests are becoming frequent. The government, led by Faure Gnassingbé, banned them 3 years ago. He's ruled for 20 years. Recent constitutional changes allow him to stay in power for life. Demonstrators want him to go.
He should step aside and let someone else lead. You can't keep ruling us by force forever. Let someone else prove what they can do.
Demonstrators blocked roads all over the city and in several other towns after activists called for 3 days of peaceful protests starting on Thursday. The rising cost of living has also fueled discontent. Togo's the 10th poorest country in the world.
All we want is for Gnassingbé to step down. We'll keep protesting, even after 3 days, until he finally leaves power.
A crackdown by police and soldiers hasn't kept people off the streets. Amnesty International says dozens were arrested and many tortured following demonstrations 3 weeks ago. The government says it hasn't received any official complaints of torture. But it's something the regional bloc ECOWAS has frequently condemned Gnassingbé's government for. His rule followed that of his father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, who was in power for 38 years. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands forced from their homes during decades of crackdowns on dissent. Last month, a popular singer, Amron, called for people to mobilize against the government in a social media video. He was arrested the following day. After his release, 2 weeks later, he apologized to Gnassingbé and said he was seeking psychiatric treatment in hospital. That hasn't deterred the demonstrators.
Faure, please set Togo free. This country doesn't belong to you or the Gnassingbé family. Just let go of the country.
The government said anyone spreading false information or causing disturbance will face the full force of the law.